So, welcome to our second session with Nicole Belanger.
Now is the time in our work life where we see the most generations coming to work at the same time. So we're experiencing something a little different. Families are bringing different cultural backgrounds and expectations into the home. Employees have different experiences, different expectations.
Nicole is a specialist in DISC and leadership development, and she works with organizations to strengthen communication, improve team dynamics, reduce conflict, and create high-performing cultures.
Let's say there's conflict or there's challenges in communication. Can I think about this from an empathy standpoint? Can I think about, can I have more empathy towards this person and what they might be experiencing based on their positionality?
Nicole also brings a unique perspective through her work with the Wheel of Power and Privilege, helping leaders better understand positionality, perspective, and the experiences that shape how we show up in the workplace.
But as you start to reflect on where you stand in some of these categories, you'll start to notice where those barriers, where those challenges, where some of the exclusion might exist for you as a person, and how that can define how you're moving through the world.
I'm Heather Maxwell, and I would love for you to join A Minute with Maxwell, Mission in Motion. So we will be diving into the Wheel of Power and Privilege today with you, Nicole. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me back. This is great. I'm excited for this one.
I am so excited as well. We're always excited to talk about teams and how teams can work better together and the engagement, making sure that your team is engaged. So, Nicole, let's dive in. We talked about DISC in our last episode, which was, again, it's just such a great tool. However, you also use something called the Wheel of Power and Privilege. For listeners who may not be familiar with it, what is that?
Yeah, so this is a unique tool that I love to introduce to teams because I feel like it's this silent tool that sits in the background that doesn't get enough exposure. And so I was first introduced to the Wheel of Power and Privilege when I entered into graduate school. And I began learning about the research process. And this tool is actually used in research. Most of the time, I've seen it come up in educational research, anything to do with leadership research. And so what surprised me when I got introduced to the tool is how much emphasis researchers place on self-awareness, what we call positionality, and identifying their own bias. And so what's interesting is if you ever, I'm not saying you will, but if anyone ever does want to look at academic research, I know it's not the most dynamic stuff to read, but you'll often see researchers acknowledging factors that might influence how they interpret data or how they approached a study or how they approached a group of people when they were about to study them. So, there's this understanding amongst researchers that our experiences really shape how we view the world. And so researchers actually have to call it out publicly before they put pen to paper. And so what the Wheel of Power and Privilege does is it gives them a visual framework on how to reflect on how their identity shapes their perspectives and how they would move about the world. So it's really, when you take DISC and you take the Wheel of Power and Privilege, these two frameworks, when you combine them together, not only do you get two frameworks that are at the core going to help you with self-awareness, which everyone needs more of, but it helps us really recognize that our experience really helps influence how we interact with others. And so these are two really fundamental frameworks that help us interact better with people.
Oh, wow. That is huge. And that is so impactful, Nicole. And we talk about bias all the time in interviewing, like, with an executive search and recruitment, with what we do every single day at Maxwell Management Group. We have had anti-bias training as interviewers. And it's so important to recognize that, because bias can cause organizations to overlook, especially in interviewing, at the interviewing stage, highly qualified candidates, and can reduce diversity, fairness, and the overall quality of hiring decisions as well. So I'm so glad that we are having this conversation, because it is so, so important for organizations to have these discussions and to think about this. And so you mentioned the word positionality. What does positionality mean in simple terms?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to look at positionality, so if we think about even the word, it's like, where is our position in the world? So how does my life experience shape my perspective? So I'll say it once more. How does my life experience shape my perspective?
Yeah.
And so positionality, you don't really need to remember it so much. You can call it like my position, but it's really this research term that refers to the idea that everyone moves through the world with their own life experiences and their own lens. So there was one researcher in particular back in, I believe it was the 70s. Her name is Peggy McIntosh. And she used this wonderful way to kind of bring this to light back in the day. And she said, a lot of us have a set of unearned advantages. So just how we were born into this world, we have a set of unearned advantages, just where we were born and where we were placed. And we carry around these unearned advantages in an invisible knapsack. That's what she calls it. And so that's what can bring in the bias. And so what the wheel of power and privilege does is it helps us identify where the bias might be coming from. And so what's really cool is, I hope some of your listeners are going to go on to Google. I don't like to push one wheel over another, but I do tend to lean towards the one from the Government of Canada. So if you put into Google the Wheel of Power and Privilege, you'll get one from the Government of Canada. And I think it's really well done for a few reasons. Yeah. When you look at the wheel, it's like a pizza. And so there's all of these pizza slices, and each one represents something a little bit different. So you have things from socioeconomic status, education, gender, race, etc., all on the wheel. Yeah. And what the wheel does is it asks you to place yourself where you think you are today, based on your life experience. And so if you're situated closer to the center, those factors are typically going to bring you more positionality, more influence, more power, more privilege, because those identities that are closest to the center are less marginalized based on history. Okay. And then the further you are away from the center, those are typically factors that see more barriers and they see more marginalization. So the closer to the center, the more power and privilege you possess. The further away from the center, the more barriers you're going to experience. And so this can help us understand ourselves and where we might be seeing different situations, and how we're even interpreting where our teams are coming from.
Yes.
So it's really neat.
Wow. And so that is so great that the Government of Canada actually has that right on their website. I love that. That's amazing. So thank you for mentioning that as a tool. And then how would someone actually use that wheel of power and privilege as a reflection tool, Nicole?
Mm-hmm. And I think the most practical way to use it is really in terms of self-reflection. I think this is a tool that is really about yourself. So when we talk about really that knowledge of self, and it's really to identify like what has historically granted people more power, more privilege, more access. And if I'm working with a team of people, and let's say there's conflict or there's challenges in communication, can I think about this from an empathy standpoint? Can I think about, can I have more empathy towards this person and what they might be experiencing based on their positionality? Like, are they coming to the conversation in such a way because of their circumstances? So what I love about this is the goal is always to develop more awareness, right? And what I love about the tool is it's not a calculated score. It's not like an assessment. It's unlike DISC where it's not going to pop out a formula for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not a tool really that's used to compare yourself to others. But as you start to reflect on where you stand in some of these categories, you'll start to notice where those barriers, where those challenges, where some of the exclusion might exist for you as a person, and how that can define how you're moving through the world. So there's a few questions that the exercise encourages us to ask, and I've written them down just so that I don't forget to say them out loud. But as a leader, you might start to ask yourself. So if you're a leader of a long-term care home, for instance, but how might my experiences be influencing my assumptions about families that are coming in? What opportunities have I had that others may not have had as the leader? What challenges have shaped my perspective on certain issues that we've experienced as a team? And so these are great sort of reflexive questions that I always encourage teams and leaders to start doing some of this work. And there's one, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, no, I was just going to say, Nicole, that I think is especially important in today's world because we know that, number one, we now have 5 generations in the workforce, and we have a highly multicultural workforce as well. So multi-generations, multicultural, and we have to take all of this into account when we're leading people that are from many different generations and many different cultures as well.
Yeah, it's a great point because I think oftentimes people will experience the wheel of power and privilege from an inclusive and diversity lens. So they might say, oh, this is opening up a conversation, and it absolutely can. It gives some perspective. Let's say, for example, a leader is unsure how to approach inclusion and diversity in the workplace. This is a great starting point just to even just start. I always say, start with yourself. Start there, start where it's comfortable. And I'll give you a really tangible example that I think everyone can identify with, because sometimes people are like, oh, this concept is a little bit odd to me. So I find that this example really brings it home. So imagine 2 leaders observing the same employee. And one leader sees this employee as someone who asks a lot of questions and thinks, oh, this person is really engaged and they're very curious. I like it. And then you have the second leader who observes the same behavior and thinks, geez, these questions, this person's not confident. They must need more direction and coaching. And so the behavior is identical. The interpretation is vastly different.
Yes.
And so
that's a great example.
That's what positionality is. It helps us recognize that our interpretation of scenarios and situations isn't necessarily the truth. It's just our perspective based on,
Yeah.
remember that knapsack I told you about? That's what's
Yes.
in the knapsack, that's your perspective. Mm-hmm.
And I love that you called it an invisible knapsack. That is really good for us to think about and to remember. And when we pause to reflect, we move from automatic thinking to intentional thinking. So instead of reacting based on instinct or familiarity, we can evaluate people and situations more objectively. So that is huge, Nicole. I just think that is so huge. This podcast is brought to you by Maxwell Management Group. For nearly 2 decades, we've worked side by side with individuals, teams, and organizations to uncover what makes them exceptional and to help them grow from the inside out. It's not just about reaching goals, it's about creating success that feels deeply authentic and genuinely meaningful. Organizations, like people, have stories. And when those stories are rooted in purpose, they become powerful forces for attraction, culture, and identity. We are committed to partnering with brands that want to lead with intention, cultivate vibrant workplace cultures, and become the kind of employer that top talent seeks out, not because of perks, but because of purpose. Over the past 18 years, I've had the privilege of leading Maxwell Management Group's growth into a highly specialized national executive search and education firm, one that thrives on values, vision, and the belief that when people lead with purpose, extraordinary things happen. To find out more about our executive search, recruitment, and education services, please visit us at maxwellmanagementgroup.com. How does the Wheel of Power and Privilege connect to DISC?
Yeah, I like to use them in tandem, and I often describe it this way. So DISC helps us understand how people communicate. And the Wheel of Power and Privilege helps us understand how some of our experiences, our life experiences, really shape how we see the world. And that example I just gave of those 2 leaders assessing the same behavior is exactly what happens in real life. And,
Yes.
in senior living, we see this with families all of the time. A family member may appear like demanding, highly involved. And so their DISC profile, we would say, okay, this could be a D or a C style. So it helps us understand their communication style. So as a leader, how do I communicate with this family member better? Then the wheel reminds us to consider what experiences are they bringing into the home that might be influencing this behavior.
Yes.
So have they had a negative healthcare experience before in the past? So where is this coming from? Perhaps there are different cultural expectations around caring for elders that we need to come around to. Or maybe they're just carrying grief or stress, and we need to be more empathetic towards that experience. So in a nutshell, DISC helps us understand how people communicate, and the wheel allows us to be just a little bit more curious about why people see different perspectives differently than our own. Because what we tend to do as human beings is we tend to use our own life experience as the benchmark.
Yes, that is so true.
And this shows up for leaders oftentimes when you ever heard a leader say, well, I don't understand why everyone needs so much recognition all the time. Like, I never had that. We're guilty of setting the benchmark of our own lived experience and not understanding why others are different than us. And that came out for me in your session on generations.
Oh, wow. I love that. Okay, that's great. Thank you for that feedback, Nicole. I appreciate that. We just gave a speech or a talk on the 5 generations in the workforce at one of our latest conferences that you and I were both at. And so thank you so much for recognizing that. That's so interesting how, again, the reality is that all of us have bias at the end of the day. We all have biases. And
Mm-hmm.
the goal really isn't to necessarily eliminate them entirely. It's to recognize them so that they have less influence over our judgment. Would you agree with that,
Mm-hmm.
Nicole?
Yeah, and I I loved your example about the two generations meeting and the younger generation bringing in the laptop and the older
Yes,
generation not aligning. And so again, the older
yes,
generation, no fault of their own, just this is the
yeah,
benchmark. This is how I experienced the workplace.
yeah,
So why is
yeah,
it different than mine? And sort of
yep.
moving
That's
away
so true.
from that tension and just letting it go, it helps
Yes.
us move through, scenarios that could be tripping us up that don't need to.
Yes, it's so true. And we had mentioned, so in our talk, I had mentioned that we coached a CEO because he was actually quite upset that every time he met, and he was Gen X, and he met with his Gen Y direct report, someone that directly reported to him, every time she came in, she brought her laptop. And she immediately opened it up in their meeting. Every meeting they had, she just immediately opened up her laptop because for her, that was the norm. She took her notes on her laptop and she wanted to be sure that she didn't miss anything. So she immediately came into that workspace to meet the CEO, opened her laptop and would start typing. And that did not sit well with him. Let's put it that way. It did not sit well with him because he just thought, let's just sit and talk. Like, I just want to sit and talk with you. You don't have to open your laptop. And he almost thought like she wasn't paying attention to him because she was typing on her laptop, where really she felt, I don't want to miss anything he says. I want to take notes so that I'm not missing anything. So it's so funny how they both viewed that very differently. She was just trying to be responsible and
Mm-hmm.
take notes on her laptop so she didn't miss anything. He took it as she really wasn't paying attention to what he was saying. He wanted her to close the laptop and just have a conversation, eye to eye, talk, back and forth. And so it was so interesting. And, we actually were able to bring them together, and we talked and we asked them questions like, how can we resolve this type of a difference? And she acknowledged that it might be better for her to come into the room and just have a personal conversation with him for 5 minutes or so. Just look him in the eye, make sure that he recognizes that she was paying very close attention and she wanted to connect with him, right? So just have that banter, have that 5-minute chat, and then say to the CEO, perhaps, do you mind if I open my laptop to take notes? Because I really value what you and I are talking about today. And I would like to take notes to make sure that I document everything and that I don't forget anything. Would you mind if I did that? So just that
Mm-hmm.
little shift made a huge difference at the end of the day to something that was creating a bit of, it was just sort of creating a rift, I guess I would say, between them, right? And so just that little tweak in her coming in and having that 5-minute discussion with him first, eye to eye, before she opened her laptop, and then asking him if he would mind if she took notes on her laptop, just that made a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just one small example, right?
Yeah.
In the work of the different generations and how they were viewing things. So that it's so powerful when we think about these things, right? It's just so powerful. And so why then, Nicole, do you think positionality matters for leaders in our sector?
Yeah, I think you touched on it beautifully. Senior living leaders work with incredibly diverse teams, and so now is the time in our work life where we see the most generations coming to work at the same time. So we're
Yeah.
experiencing something a little different. Families
Yeah.
are bringing different cultural backgrounds and expectations into the home. Employees have different experiences, different expectations, different perspectives and ways of seeing the world. And so, this is a time when organizations are trying their best to improve things like engagement, retention, psychological
Yeah.
safety. And
Yes.
I fully believe that leaders need tools like these to better
Yeah.
understand people. And
Yes.
what we have done over the last, I will say, couple of years since AI really came to the forefront is we've been able to outsource tasks, wonderful tasks, to AI. But
Yes.
unfortunately, one thing we cannot outsource to AI is our own self-awareness and our own ability to work with people. We'll never be able to
Yeah.
outsource that. We just never
Yep.
will. So that's why I feel so passionate about helping leaders uncover tools that I may be able to help them with navigating this. One organizational psychologist I just love and recommend to everybody is Dr. Tasha Eurich. And it's spelled
Yes.
Eurich. She's wonderful. She's got TED Talks. You can look her up on Google. She's a wonderful speaker. And she talks about the 95-15 paradox. And her research actually suggests that 95% of people wholeheartedly believe that they have exquisite self-awareness. And
Yeah.
what her research brought about is only about 10 to 15% of us actually have good self-awareness when they
Yeah.
assessed it like objectively. And so, in other words, many of us are going through the day thinking that we understand ourselves way better than we actually do. And
Yes.
so I think that's a really important insight. If we're aware of our own assumption, like you mentioned, our own bias, our
Yeah.
blind spots, right? We talk a lot about blind spots in leadership. We can find ourselves like unintentionally misinterpreting situations, like a couple of those
Yeah.
examples I gave you. So
Yeah.
yeah, it gives us insights to actually ask ourselves, like, what am I missing?
Yeah.
How can I come about this in a different way?
Yes, that is so true,
Mhm.
Nicole. And I always feel that self-reflection is one of the best skills that we can have in leadership. And great leaders understand that their perspective is not the only perspective. And I think that is so important for each of us to think about, because self reflection encourages humility and the recognition that we don't know everything, and our experiences shape how we see the world, and others may have different strengths, communication styles, lived experiences that are equally valuable. So, this is especially important in today's workforce where 5 generations, diverse cultural backgrounds, and varying life experiences are all working together.
Mhm.
So, what, Nicole, then would you say is one practical takeaway that healthcare leaders can apply from both DISC and the Wheel of Power and Privilege?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, I would encourage anyone to take a DISC assessment. You can do them online for free. There's all kinds of ways you can get your hands on a DISC assessment,
Yeah.
and spend the time investing in understanding yourself.
Yes.
Because that time will never go wasted. It'll never be wasted time.
Yeah.
And spend time with the Wheel and Power and Privilege on your own. You don't need to, print it off and get in a room with people and start, talking about this tool. It's really a self-reflection tool first, and
Yes.
reflect on those experiences. Take a look where you might be experiencing marginalization or different access than other people. And, And yeah, I think, self-awareness is one of those leadership tools that, we can certainly keep developing. Clearly, if, Dr. Eurich says 95% of us have it wrong. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah, that's a huge percentage. Oh my goodness. Yes.
using the time to really drill down on what's going to make us as leaders be more adaptable, be more empathetic towards people. There's something that your audience can look up. It's called like the dark triad of leadership traits. And so we tend to value, I would say, sort of beyond the D style personalities. Our society tends to value leaders who exude sort of like narcissistic tendencies. I'll give as an example. And so we're tending to lead in that direction where we're leaning on these leaders. But then on the opposite side of the spectrum, there's a huge paradox because the research is telling us that that is not helping us in the workplace. And so I think like in a relationship driven sector like senior living, let's all make a commitment to diving into making a meaningful difference. And I think these are two tangible ways that leaders can do that today.
Oh, that's great, Nicole. That is so impactful. And I just think that when leaders regularly examine their assumptions, they become more effective, stronger decision makers, and more inclusive leaders. And we can move from asking, like, do I like this person? To what evidence suggests this person can succeed in their role and contribute to our mission, right? So it's just changing sometimes our thought process when we self-reflect and we realize that we all are bringing biases with us, right? In that invisible backpack that you mentioned, I think I'm going to remember that invisible backpack now.
Right?
It's something we always think about, right? And that self-reflection is so important. So I'm so glad that we discussed this today, Nicole, and that you mentioned that it's a tool that anyone can access right on the Government of Canada's website, which is awesome and amazing. And as we know, DISC is also available to do for free online. I think if people just Google DISC, you'll be able to find where you can do that for free online as well. So these are valuable tools that you can utilize with your teams. So that's just amazing, Nicole. I love this. It is just so important that we all recognize, again, that we have our own biases. But these tools like DISC and the Wheel of Power and Privilege will help us learn other people's styles and also to self-reflect on our own styles and our own biases as well. So thank you for sharing that with us today, Nicole. That was excellent. Do you have any sort of last words for our listeners?
Yeah, this has been like a really fun conversation. And I think what came to the forefront for me is just the accessibility of these tools is really important. I feel very passionate about sharing it and teaching it. And so I really hope that there's a lot of value that your audience finds in these resources and they can, look it up on their own and start kind of playing around and really doing that deep self-reflection work. And, like I said before, we can't outsource that to AI. We're going to have to dive in and do the work ourselves.
We have to do that work ourselves on ourselves, right? That is so true. Yes.
That's it. So, give it the other tasks, but
yes.
But yeah, this has been a great conversation, and I'm very grateful for it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I am so grateful that you joined me today, Nicole. I love this conversation. it's just so enlightening. And I think it's it will empower people, right? And again, that self-reflection is just so important for us to recognize sort of where we're at, what our experiences, like where our experiences have brought us, but also what biases we might have because of our experiences, right? Mm-hmm. So, Nicole, thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us today. What I appreciate most about this conversation is a reminder that effective leadership is not about treating everyone the same. It's about understanding people well enough to connect with them in meaningful ways. And through DISC, we learned how different communication styles influence how people lead, collaborate, make decisions, and respond under pressure. We've explored how greater self-awareness and awareness of others can reduce conflict, strengthen relationships, and improve team performance. And then we also learned and discussed the wheel of power and privilege and the importance of positionality, recognizing that each of us brings our own unique experiences, perspectives, and assumptions that shape how we see the world and interact with others. For leaders in seniors living, long-term care, healthcare, and other mission-driven organizations, that awareness can help create more inclusive workplaces, stronger teams, and better outcomes for residents, families, and staff alike. If there's one key takeaway from today's conversation, it's this. When we take the time to understand ourselves and others, we create the foundation for trust, collaboration, and high-performing teams. And in a sector built on relationships and human connection, that understanding is not simply helpful, it's essential. Thank you again, Nicole, for joining us and for the important work you do helping organizations strengthen communication, build synergy, and unlock the full potential of their teams. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for another episode of Mission in Motion, A Minute with Maxwell. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, share this episode with a colleague, and follow Maxwell Management Group as we continue bringing you conversations with leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of healthcare, seniors living, and community services. Until next time, remember that great leadership begins with understanding ourselves, grows through understanding others, and thrives when we create environments where everyone can contribute their strengths. I'm Heather Maxwell, and this has been Mission in Motion, A Minute with Maxwell.
So thank you for joining us today. Please feel free to visit our website at maxwellmanagementgroup.com. And also, please like and subscribe to our podcast wherever you download podcasts. Thank you for joining, and see you next time.